Let's call this Defensive Actions 101. A defensive action is any action you take to prevent yourself from being wounded. So the three categories of actions, that's offensive actions, defensive actions, and preparations. Defensive actions are the most important because they're the ones that keep you from getting killed. There are two ways you can defend yourself. You can remove the target from the attack, or you can remove the attack from the target. Or you can do some combination of those things. A defensive action made with the body, that is by moving the body, is called an esquive. It removes the target from the attack. A defensive action made with the weapon, that is, with the sword, removes the attack from the target. We call that a parry. To esquive, that is to move your body away from the attack, you can move basically either back, beside, or below the attack. For example, you make a straight attack at my chest, I retreat. I move back away from the attack, out of distance. You make that same straight attack, I can move to the side, either side. That's the incartata and the intagliata. Or I might make a passata di sotto under your attack and let it pass over my head. And those are the three basic kinds of ways you can slip or avoid the attack. That brings us to parries. There are three kinds of parries: obstruction, deflection, and diversion. An obstruction parry works by blocking the attack. That is, you place your blade in a more or less perpendicular angle against the trajectory of the incoming blade. You stop that line of attack. Deflection parries and diversion parries both deviate the attack from its original line. A deflection parry does it by striking the opponent's blade out of line, and a diversion parry does it by pushing the opponent's blade out of line. So obstruction parries are used primarily against cuts, and diversion and deflection parries are used against thrusts. Regardless of what combination of moves you do to defend yourself, the defensive sequence is always the same. That is, 1, close the line, 2, control the opponent's blade, and 3, make your counter action, whatever it's going to be, whether it's counterattack or riposte or counter-riposte. Yeah? But always those three things: close the line, control the blade, execute a counteraction. Now those things may be consecutive, or they may be almost simultaneous, but you always have to do those three things. Now there's something about parries that's very important to understand. That is that the parry is not a particular placement of your blade. Parry is in the transition of your blade from one place to another. And we talk a lot about the principle of conservation of action, which states when it is not necessary to act, it is necessary not to act. And when it is necessary to act, it is necessary to act right fucking now. And by RFN, we mean without hesitation or second thoughts. This is particularly clear when it comes to defense. When is it time to act? When is it time not to act? My teacher, Mr. Logan, said, the time to parry is just as your opponent's point touches the fabric of your shirt. In other words, in defense, you do as little as possible, as late as possible. The benefit of doing very little and very late is that the later you parry, the longer you can wait, the less likely it is that your opponent is going to be able to deceive your parry. That is, you make your opponent commit to an attack before you commit to a defense. When is it not necessary to act? Well, it's not necessary if your opponent is posturing. It's not necessary if your opponent is making a feint. It's not necessary if your opponent is out of distance and can't hurt you. It's not necessary unless and until your opponent's attack is imminent. That is, if you don't defend, you will be hit. When it is time to parry, the best thing is, in general, to remove the attack from the target by the shortest possible distance in the least amount of time. However, there are many, many choices of parries you can make. How do you choose which one? One of the considerations in your choice of parries will be your opponent's expectations. For example, most people, if you attack the inside high line, they'll parry cart. Some people, that's the only parry they know. But you could parry contre de six, contre de tierce, septime, seconde. Truth is, you can make just about any parry fit just about any attack. What do you choose? Well, to start with, you can choose the one that your opponent expects least. That means he'll be least likely and least able to be able to deceive it, right? The other thing is, what's your plan after the defense? After every parry comes the riposte. Remember we said, close the line, control your opponent's blade, execute a counteraction. You immediately riposte. Otherwise, you're just giving your opponent successive opportunities to kill you, and I don't see the percentage of that. So part of your choice of parries will depend on what you intend to do with your riposte. The parry's fine, but you may choose a different parry if you want to riposte in a particular way against this particular opponent. Now suppose you parry and your opponent deceives you. Now what? All is lost? Well, no. Because if you don't have a plan B, you don't have a plan at all. So you have a backup plan. We call this a compound parry. It's two parries taken in quick succession, one right after the other. Let's suppose your opponent attacks your chest. You parry cart. You know about when and where you ought to come in contact with your opponent's blade. You should be able to feel it. If you get to that point and you don't feel the blade, without hesitation, you execute a second parry. Now, which one? If your opponent attacks your chest and you parry and you don't feel the blade, your opponent could be attacking the low inside line. Your opponent could be attacking the low outside line. Your opponent could be attacking the high outside line. You need a parry that will cover all three of those lines. So from cart, your choices would be contre de carte or septime to close all those lines. And each of those parries has a complementary parry that will do that. Now, what happens if your opponent deceives your second parry? Well, it's possible to take a third parry. Probably you'll need to buy time, and you buy time with distance by taking a half step or even a full step back. But you should be able to execute two parries at least, possibly three, while standing fast. At least two. So that third parry, what if your opponent deceives your third parry? Well, there are, in combat, a limited number of times you can fuck up and still get away with it.